Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. And we are back with our friend, Tony Marolt. Excited to have him here. Of course, he can help you with consulting and publishing his company, Lead Left, Grow Right. That's also the website. We should point that out, leadleftgrowright.com. Welcome back to the show today, darling. How are you?
Hey, Joe, I'm doing great.
I'm doing great as well. Pleasure to have you back here. Always a great conversation. And I see you got your board. For those of you that are just on the podcast, you can't see on the Zoomcast. You can see he's got the board behind him. We are ready to go. And we have a great agenda for today. But we just want to recap a little bit about last week's conversation, if you don't mind. It was about setting up and really executing, we should say, leadership experiments, correct? Would you mind just giving us a little bit on that?
Yeah. So leadership experiments are kind of developmental exercises for folks. And a couple of areas that we delved into last time were the informal leadership power. And informal leaders, or informals, I'll call them, my belief, again, is that everybody is a leader, period, the end. Not can be, but everybody is a leader. And we talked a little bit about the differences in the military, where they actually recognize that people that aren't officers or aren't the chiefs in the Navy or the senior enlisted, who are kind of the middle managers, through lower rank structure, they actually do understand and actually put patches on people to say this person is this kind of leader. In Navy, they're called petty officers. They could be staff sergeants and others. And so then we talked about, why is that important? Well, those are the people that really get stuff done. So whether you're in the corporate world or whether you're in the civilian world, you have to cultivate all of your people because they're leaders. And we tend to just focus on those that might be high potential, to, those that might be able to move up quickly. But really, everybody is a leader, and you have to tap into that amazing leadership power force, right? So, and part of doing that is just really doing an assessment, and then using some of those leadership experiences, leadership experiments that we talked about, stretch them so that they can grow into the best leader they can be. And then the second thing we talked about was leadership transfer from your personal to your professional life. And in that, I read off a whole bunch. I won't read all of them, but I read off a whole bunch of different leadership skills from your personal life, such as communication,
problem solving. We can name just a few quick, right? Counseling, motivation, compassion.
Absolutely. And then at the end, I asked the question, so which of those is applicable in your professional life? And the answer is all of them. So if you were to make a list of one versus the other, they really don't change. What changes, the skill is the skill. What you change is how you apply those leadership techniques when you're talking to your, 5-year-old son versus you're talking to someone who's been with the company for 20 years and is an expert in engineering. So communication skill still is required. It's just how you apply it varies and is different. So that's what we talked about the last time, that they are directly transferable.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. And for today, we're going to talk a little about leadership challenges across generations and through different ethnic cultures, corporate cultures, etc. So we'll start by talking a little bit about cross-generational challenges.
Sure.
And I know you're going to start with baby boomers.
Yep, I'm a baby boomer, loud and proud. There are good things about my generation. There are bad things about my generation, just like there are about every generation.
Yep, exactly.
Right? But in the corporate world, whether it's nonprofit or for profit, there has been a big push to get baby boomers out, and unfortunately, it's not unfortunate, it's just how it is. But baby boomers were living longer. They want to work, and some of them are working until they die, basically. So to try and get them out, what some companies did, instead of just asking them to leave nicely, is they just basically fired them or forced them into a position where it was better for them to retire. Unfortunately, the impact then And the challenge to those that are left behind is you have lost a significant amount of really smart
Yep.
and talented people that got pushed out. And some companies, after a couple of years, said, "Oh my gosh, we made a mistake," and they
Mm-hmm.
try to hire those folks back, or they hire them back part time, but at a consultant fee, which costs them more than they did in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So baby boomers grew up with a certain, their parents were often and most likely the silent generation or the greatest generation, like myself. I had one of each.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't grow up entitled or anything else. They saw a very strong work ethic from those who fought in World War II, came back, set up their families. Middle class America grew up, and so they have very different values and very different expectations around work. The youngest generation, Gen Z, sometimes looks at that and says, "Well, I don't want to work that hard because I saw what happened to, these people that were baby boomers and they got burnt out and etc."
Yeah.
However, they were also very, very productive. So the challenge then is the people that are there are still plenty of baby boomers that are still in top leadership positions, but Generation X, which is the layer in between millennials and boomers, they are now predominantly the the masters in the workplace. They're the CEOs or upcoming directors and serving in a lot of positions. And Generation X didn't have that different experience than baby boomers in terms of expectations. They certainly had a different life experience, but so they tend to still have some attachment to some of those same old values and expectations of people. So now they are left, the boomers are gone to advise them in a lot of cases, and they are left to essentially work with the millennials and
Mm-hmm.
the newest generation, Gen Z. The millennials, really, there's kind of a first part and a back part. The first part of millennials, like my kids, didn't grow up with technology their whole life. So, like my kids, we didn't let them get a phone until they were in high school. Nowadays, Gen Z and younger, some parents are giving their kids phones when they're 4 years old, which personally I think is ridiculous. But uh,
4? Do you say
yeah,
4? Wow.
oh yeah, I've seen little kids walking around with phones communicating. Um, so good, good, bad, or ugly, I don't know. I think that will be for history to judge, because we've set up, in my opinion, an
Mm-hmm.
addiction pattern. We've addicted people to phones, as well as boomers, etc. But back to my comments around leadership challenges. So you have Gen X, uh, the first part of the millennials, probably not that hard because they still grew up like my older kids grew up with, a boomer parent, or a Gen X parent, or both in our case. But the latter part of millennials began to really be immersed in electronics all the time. And Gen Z is completely immersed in electronics. And some of the things, I think we mentioned this one time, but if not, um, the attention span for a latter part millennial is like 30 to 45 seconds. And for a Gen Z, that is only about 20 to 30 seconds. Well, that's
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of time to capture someone, get them to understand what you're communicating, because they're ready to move on because they're used to looking at their phones, right? Bring it up.
Yeah, of course.
And so those are some very difficult challenges to overcome. In addition, then Gen Z, which has a reputation of being lazy, unwilling to work, entitled, they're much more associated with quiet quitting. And quiet quitting is just doing the basic average minimum that the job requires and not doing anything extra. Well,
Mm.
now there's a phenomena that's come behind it, and guess what it's called? Well, if you want to quietly quit, we're going to quietly fire you. Um,
Mm,
and
yep.
and so with remote working, especially remote workers are the number one target, um, for people generally. So you have this giant mix of talent still out there from boomers. So you have 4 generations out there. And trying to manage those is a real challenge for a leader. And so, uh,
Mm-hmm.
so I just don't like to point out challenges, but also some solutions. You know, solutions for me, again, my belief is everyone is a leader. If you treat everyone with respect, if you treat everyone as a leader and tell them that they have this potential within them, then you're more likely, regardless of generation, to be able to capture their attention. Now, with
Yeah.
Gen Z, for instance, you have to set the expectations, however, and you have to follow through that you are going to have high expectations that the minimum is not going to be
Yeah,
allowed.
absolutely.
So those are kind of a couple of solution thoughts on how to deal. But it's a difficult challenge to leaders nowadays. Um, because the boomers were in the workforce for a long time, mostly by themselves. So now you've got 4 generations instead of 1 or 2 to deal with. So
Yeah. I love it. What are my kids? I don't even know the term. They're 5 and 7. What's the next gen? I don't. There's like the
I
Gen
don't know.
Zs, the Gens. I don't know. I'm just curious. All right,
Yeah,
I gotta look that up. I wonder how. Yeah, but they're like they're 5 and 7, but they're like their iPads. So it's like a cell phone.
yep,
And
yep,
you go to dinner and you do well. The parents want to shut up their kids on the iPads. I'm guilty of that at times myself. How's
yep,
that really affecting them? There's no communication at the dinner table. There's like it got
right.
me thinking. Yeah, sometimes too much communication could be bad. My goodness.
Well, a lot of people, and I forget the name of the movie, but it's basically a documentary, and it's done with executives that were formerly with Google and Apple and Facebook. Those CFOs, CEOs, whatever they were before, director of marketing, almost to a person in that documentary, they say
Mm-hmm.
they don't allow electronics at dinner, period.
Yep.
Sometimes they don't allow them from the time they get home because they know they're going to be using them in school. Most schools have iPads or some version of that or a laptop. So it's very hard because again, I just said so. So if the millennials have 30 to 45 seconds and then it goes down, imagine
Then,
what attention
ah,
span your kids must have, right? It
exactly.
might be 10 or 15 seconds. And so it's hard, but I think the solution is if you're an addict, you have to withdraw from it. So creating periods of time where they are not allowed to use it is probably a good way to um, help them and create situations where they are forced to
Hmm.
be in conversation and understand whether it's adults or other kids, push them outside to play instead of letting them stay inside. It's easier said than done in some places, but anyway. So,
Exactly. All right. Sorry to digress there for a
no,
second. Now, and I
no,
lost
that's a
my place.
good.
Where are we?
Yeah, no. Well, one of the questions you asked was, "What are my kids?" I don't know.
Yeah.
Since we're already at the Z, we might have to go to
Yeah.
like maybe your kids are double A or double B generation. I'm not sure, but what we're going to talk about, after cross generational, is another set of challenges, and that's corporate culture, and that can include personal culture as well as the corporate culture itself. What does
Yep.
the company espouse? How do
Mm-hmm.
they run their organization? So the biggest one today, obviously, that's a challenge for leaders is, are you going to have people work in office or out of office? We
Yep.
had a very strange period, once in a 1,000 year thing or 100 year thing where we had a pandemic and we forced people to learning remotely, which we know now with figures coming out from education department, that was a miserable failure and we've lost, we've always been kind of behind other countries, but now we're way worse. And and we lost like 2 years in math across the board. That's bad for the country. So okay, so that's fine. What happened to our remote workers? Were they as productive or not? Um,
Yeah.
we had we had things appear where people would put apps on that would show that they were active at work, because some workplaces are monitoring people remotely. What's their time on keyboard? And so they tried to trick, the organization. Others just found it difficult to communicate, because Zoom meeting is not the same as seeing someone's full facial and body language. So that's the big question out there: is, are you going to allow remote work? If so, to what extent? Some companies like Tesla, Elon Musk has said, everybody back.
Yeah.
And he's had a lot of resistance with that. Others have said, I think Google is the one, we're going to do hybrid. So you have to be in the office a minimum of 2 days a week or 3 days a week. I forget which one it is. And they're being challenged by their workers who are used to waking up, getting their cup of coffee, and doing their work in their pajamas all day. Or at most, maybe putting on a nice shirt or top in case they have any Zoom lessons, but they're wearing, shorts or pajamas below. So, that's a huge question out there. And I don't know who's ultimately going to win in the workplace. Personally, I think at a minimum, you have to do the hybrid, because if, as we just talked about with the different generations and their addiction or non-addiction to electronic devices, it's the same thing in a workplace, because there's something about having people get together. Humans are, social animals. So they can't be as social. Now, if they don't want to do that and come into the office, I know where I used to work, I have a good friend, and he only comes in on Wednesday. He said there's not very many people in the building at all. So how do you replace that rapport and working relationships that you used to have in the workplace? If you can't go to lunch anymore with your mentor, or just to meet someone from another department to find out what's going on, networking is kind of hard if you're working remote.
True.
So that's a huge challenge that's out there in front of everyone. I don't know where we're going to end up on. Associated with that is this cultural challenge of work-life balance. We've talked about it for years. Quite often, with my generation, work-life balance meant mostly work and a little bit of balance. So, but part of that was in the DNA, is work hard like my parents did, and you're going to get ahead and do more than just the minimum. Do exceptional work on the weekends if you have to. And we probably overwork too much at the expense of families and friends, etc. But what is that work-life balance? It's not ever going to be equal, because your life is dynamic, so is your work life dynamic. So how do you manage that? So I think companies are going to have to be freer in how much control they exert over the employees, but they still have to have the expectations, and they can't just let it. A few companies just say, well, you can take off whenever you want. Well, those are usually Silicon Valley types that can afford to do those, to have that, they're bringing in tons of money, so they can afford to have these workers take off whenever they want. So that's a big challenge, work-life balance. I mean, what's your work-life balance? How do you make it work or not work?
Well, me personally, I try my best. It's not easy because there's a lot of work and there's a lot of kids, and I'm by myself. So work lot, you got to do both. I do my best, but boy, oh boy, I feel like I'm always stressed out because I'm working so much. And then I have the kids in the morning, then I have the kids in the afternoon at night. And it's like every day there's a sport. So I do it, but I think I'm a little too stressful and I need to kind of chill, but easier said than done. It's not easy, but I do it. I do it, but I need to be more aware of my reactions towards them, because I take it out on them if mommy's tired because I worked all day, and then we're running around to sports, and I got to get up early because then we have to take a bath, we have to have dinner, we have to do soccer, football.
Exactly. Yeah, you're time switching and category switching so much that it's super stressful, right? So it's a a great thing to talk about. It's a harder thing to actually accomplish. So that, I think, is going to have to work itself out as to what work-life balance is. A couple other things maybe to touch on, because I know our time's starting to draw to a close pretty soon. Green advocacy. So is your company, are they fully supportive of green initiatives like sustainability, electric vehicles, things like that? Are they responsible or advocates for social justice, and to what degree are they responsible?
Mm-hmm.
All of that now bears into a company's culture.
Yeah.
So therefore, the employees, if you're working in a company that is an advocate in
Mm-hmm.
one area or another, do they expect you to be an advocate? If so, does that advocacy go
Has.
against your personal beliefs or desire to advocate for it? Ethnic or cultural challenges, practicing religion in the workplaces. So, for example, Fish Fridays for Catholics, or daily prayers to Mecca. Are there places for people to practice that religion, or is it just, nope, you can't do it. You're gonna have to find some other way. And
Yeah.
then along with that, always is how much, if any, accommodations are made, right?
True.
And then, we have month-long celebrations of certain heritage, often based on skin
What?
color and associated cultural celebrations. Well, that can pose challenges at times for people. So how do you bring everybody in, and celebrate the uniqueness that is
Good
within
question.
everyone and within their rich cultures? So disability challenges. The Americans Disability Act took a lot of those issues off the table, but some companies practice it and others don't, and just hope they don't get it inspected. So are they in compliance with that, if you're disabled or not? What about hiring practices with disabled people? That affects how people work or not. To what degree are you going to accommodate people, and how is that interaction going to work with other employees? Then, of course, talent shortages, there across the board. The job market has tons and tons of openings right now, in stark contrast to all the inflation that's going on. So at some point, if the Fed continues to cut rates, or increase rates rather, are there going to be more openings, or fewer openings as companies start laying off people? And you're already starting to see that happen. So for talent, it's difficult if you're trying to hire good people. And if you hire them, that's one thing. Can you keep them is the other thing. Because if you hire them, let's say you hire someone for $30, and then a month later they get their exact same job basically, but now it's paying 45. Are they gonna, a lot of states are right to work
Yeah.
states, so they're gonna take off.
Yeah.
So how's that working for you? Along with that is the investment in people. Are you training them? Are you doing leadership development experiments? Are you stretching them? Are you planning for your, what does planning look like now when people, people like me as a baby boomer, they used to stay with companies for a long time. So you could plan career accession programs. But now when you have people that could take off after a couple of years, and that was supposed to be your top person to be the CFO, for instance. Well, how do you even work in that environment? How do you backfill when that person's gone and you just lost your top candidate for something that was supposed to occur 5 to 10 years in the future?
Yeah.
So, and again, what we mentioned before, the remote workplace versus being in person, that makes your challenge of training and investing in people even triple harder.
Yeah.
And then I guess the last category I'd mention is diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. It used to be diversity and inclusion. Now it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And quite frankly, those definitions vary within a workplace as to what that means. For instance, equity can be everything from everything is equal, and apportionment of people of specific cultures have to be promoted, to no, just want to make hiring practices, as equitable as possible. Social justice advocacy is thrown in there. And I'll give an example of Disney. Disney, like some other companies, has launched into the public and advocacy for certain social justice issues, and they've had some things backfire on them because of that. So companies ultimately are interested in the almighty dollar. So it's going to play out over time as to whether companies, which used to be pretty non-political, they were in it for the green. The green initiative called the money, and now they're jumping into all these other initiatives. And sometimes the consumer base says, no, if you're going to support that, I used to like going to Disney parks, but now that you're espousing a certain view, it's not fun anymore. So we're going to have to figure that out. And last but not least is this concept of wokeness that's out there, and going back in our history and trying to recreate it, or punish people for their great-great-grandfather's sin, renaming schools. There's just a lot to wokeness in trying to, espouse that. So companies today have this huge array of challenges that we've touched on. I've given a couple areas where I thought I had some maybe solution things, but it remains to be seen. It's a big stew out there right now that's boiling, and we'll have to see how things shake out.
Yeah, absolutely. We do. And we are out of time, Tony. This is the perfect timing for us to wrap it up, I guess, right?
Yep.
LeadLeftGrowRight.com. And how else can we reach you?
Tony.marolt@gmail.com or 816-694-4656. And on LeadLeftGrowRight.com, you can submit a contact form with any questions or comments, and that'll come right to me and I can answer you. So thank you, everyone.
Oh, thank you so much. You have a fantastic day, and looking forward to the next time we meet again. Will it be next week? Same time, same place? It usually is, right?
Yeah, it usually is, but I'll have to double check. So sometimes schedules change.
Absolutely. Well, you have a fantastic day, and thank you so much for being here. As always, we appreciate you, Tony. Have a great day.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.